All right. Welcome everyone to this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital. I'm your host, Will Christensen, and I am actually beyond excited this morning. I have Carina McLeod here. So, Carina, tell us, you've done a little bit of this monetizing your mental capital. Why would a seller, an e-commerce seller, or someone who's looking to monetize their mental capital, why would they be reaching out to you perhaps for advice?
Yeah, definitely. Because as you say, this is something that I've done. So I'm a founder of an Amazon focused agency, and that agency evolved because of the skill set and the knowledge that I previously had that I didn't realize would be something that I could monetize so long ago. And it has been, and now we are, it was never part of the plan, but I was able to identify that there was a need for the skills that I had, and then was able to grow that into the business that I have now, which is e-commerce nurse.
So it sounds like you've definitely lived this road a little bit. Progression is something that you're familiar with.
Yeah, definitely. It's always interesting when you speak with other owners of businesses, because I think when you grow up, you always think that you need to have almost a master plan when you create a business. And when you don't have a master plan and you chat to other business owners that seem to, you almost sort of feel that, hang on, because I don't have a master plan, does that really make me like, do I feel like I am awarded the badge of being a business owner, right? Because almost I feel to some degree I've winged it, right? In terms of I just figured out I can do this, and actually I can make money from this, and actually I can make a business from this. So that's been sort of part of the journey of, so my background is I started off working for Amazon. So I worked at Amazon in the UK for over 7 years, and I worked within vendor management. And what then happened was I burnt out, the typical thing that happens with many people that work at Amazon. And I decided, do you know what? I've had enough, and I'm just going to go and travel. And so I actually rented out my house and purchased a single ticket to Latin America, and just thought, right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to figure out what I was going to do. Ended up sort of fast forwarding, I ended up living in Costa Rica. I was actually there for 8 years. But when I first arrived in Costa Rica, I was thinking, right, I need to start earning again. How can I earn some money? And what happened was I had vendors that I had really good relationships with my time at Amazon reaching out, asking for help. And I was like, because I was always sort of in the Amazon way of working, and Amazon, you don't sort of realize how complex Amazon is when you work there. And you don't realize that sellers and vendors are trying to figure it out. And so all of a sudden, I started to see Amazon on the other side of the fence, and sort of seeing actually it is complex. And actually, vendors need this at time, vendors need help. And so I started offering my services to vendors. And that's when it all began, was when I started to do basic things like catalog uploads, but just vendors didn't have a clue what they needed to do. And so my world started off on the vendor side, and then I was able to grow from there.
What was it that tipped you off? Because one of the first questions we like to explore is how to identify which part of your mental capital to monetize, right? Our minds are really powerful things, right? We go and consume knowledge, and then something we did before becomes easier. And my kids cleaning the dishes, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time they do it, it's not nearly as difficult as that first time when they're trying to put the dishes in upside down, or they're always putting plastic things on the bottom rack, or whatever else it is, right? We begin to really synthesize that information so that the next time we touch it, it becomes much easier. So for you, what did that look like? How did you recognize that you had synthesized a piece of knowledge that was now monetizable?
It was the fact that I was then at the point where there was a demand there for it. So to be honest, what I was doing was quite basic. It's something that I almost didn't really need to think about that I could do. And the more I was doing it, the more that people wanted it. And then there was word of mouth, and it was spreading. And that's when I was like, well, hang on. In my eyes, I wasn't doing anything really that complicated. And I was like, surely you're able to do this yourselves. But actually, I started to realize, no, I actually had this knowledge that I took for granted in a way that I had learned. But actually, from the days, because my days at Amazon were very much the days where you had to do everything. We had catalog in the same building where you'd phone them up and ask them to do you a favor in exchange for buying them a pint. That was kind of how the world worked. But it was brilliant because what it did was it allowed you to understand everything, the whole landscape. And still to this day, I'm so grateful for that, because that's something that I definitely wouldn't want to take for granted, but I did. And so then all of a sudden I thought that I had knowledge that everyone else had. And then I started to learn that I'd taken that for granted. And actually, I had a huge amount of knowledge and experience that very few people externally from Amazon had. And that's when I started to see that there was that demand. But then I was like, well, okay, this is probably just word of mouth. This is people that are working at Amazon. They're sending their clients to me. I then started to try and understand, well, is there a bigger pool here?
Is there a larger group of people that want this?
It wasn't Upwork. It wasn't Elance. I think it was even eDesk at the time. We're talking sort of nearly 12 years ago. And I started to tap away and think, right, if someone were looking for my skills, is someone looking for these skills? And lo and behold, there were all these requests for what I was doing. And it was in the US at the time. This wasn't for the UK, or the client base I had was the UK as well. But then I started to see all of a sudden there were all these people needing help. And I was getting all these jobs. I was responding to them all, and they were jumping out. And the interesting part was the rate that I thought I could charge versus the rate that they were willing to give. I was almost underselling my skill set as well. And it wasn't until they started to give me tips, almost they gave me bonuses when I
Yeah.
finished jobs, that I was like, why did you give me that much? And it's because they started to see the value that I didn't even see.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit, because I actually remember. So I was in college at the time, and while I'm telling this story, think back to the first time you monetized mental capital. When was that first time? Long before Amazon, long before, I think, lemonade stand. What did you do early in your journey? Um, so for me, one of those times was when I was graduating high school. We had to go shadow someone for a career. Like, you might end up doing this. And so, like, you spent a day where you got checked out of school. So you weren't at school that day. You followed someone around, and you had to go find somebody that would let you do that. And I asked a friend's parent if I could follow him around. He was a newspaper photographer. And so he went around and he was taking pictures and stuff. And I had grown to enjoy taking pictures for the like high school newspaper. Well, the idea of pictures and photography, I was like, okay, that's like a profession. People do that. So I'm gonna go try that out. And I borrowed a friend's camera and I went and took some engagement pictures. And at first I was like, these will be free. Like, I'm not gonna charge somebody. I don't know what I'm doing that well. One of the interesting things about pictures is you can take a lot of them, and based on sheer volume, some of them are going to turn out okay. And I gave them the pictures, and they gave me $100 tip, and I was like, "Wait, hold on a second, like, huh?" And so I went and took another set of engagements, and they did the same thing. Like, they gave me $100 tip, and I was like, "I think I can charge for this." And so then I started, the next one I was like 150, and they gave me a $50 tip, and I was like, wait, like, I think this can go higher. And I continued to push on that price a little bit. I actually think I never found the upper limits of what was there, because value-based pricing is such an interesting concept. And I think I could have probably doubled, tripled, quadrupled what was there. Now, granted, I was selling to college students. There's only so much money to go in for individuals of that age group, just like you. Yeah, like, I was getting a tip and I was like, wait a second, I didn't think I was actually any good at this. So I guess this is actually worth something, because you feel guilty at this point taking it from me without giving me something. So
That's exactly it, isn't it? It's almost they feel guilty that you've undercharged them.
Well, and I wonder if they didn't feel guilty receiving it. I wonder if that's what drove the tip, right? Like, well, because I was going to do it for free. Like I was just looking to gain some experience and get it out there. So the same thing was happening to you. And this was like on that Elance or whatever it was called back then.
Yeah, that was when I was on Elance, and so I started to gradually up my rate and started to see that there was something in it. And then, yeah, I think I just didn't realize that there was that demand for my experience. And then there came there's always a cap on that experience as well in terms of what you can do as an individual. And that was kind of the next step for me was okay, I can do all of this. Great. I can either just remain where I am and up my rates and just limit who I work with, or actually I could take this a lot further. And it all felt a bit strange because that was never the path. And I'm someone that's quite organized, got quite a lot of things sort of fixed in my mind. And all of a sudden I'm like, I'm rolling with it. But I knew that I had to do something with it. I knew that I wasn't going to be sitting on Elance looking for clients as a consultant. I think I called myself at that. Well, I wasn't really a consultant at the start. I then became more of a consultant. There was so much more scope. And I started to believe that I had a lot more than just what I was doing at that point in time.
So I definitely want you to answer that question about where you first monetized your mental capital. So I definitely want to put a pin in that one for just a second. But I want to say when I came to pricing, I learned over time that the price of something is what someone is willing to pay. And that took me a really long time to be okay with because I started to feel guilty, right? Like at some point it was like, I feel like I am overcharging here. I had to kind of really click that in my brain and recognize people will never pay more for something than they think it's worth, period. And that took me really hard. Like I was like, no, but $300 an hour? Like really? I easily charged $350 an hour for some of my automation consulting stuff that we were doing and recently have a client who's $300 an hour, like no problem. They bought 20 hours. So one of the things that I realized is it's about impact. It's about output, right? I was talking to a marketing consultant, and I think he got this from a book, but he said, when you're trying to figure out how much to charge, go stand in front of the mirror and just say to the mirror, I charge 20 bucks an hour. I charge 30 bucks an hour, and just keep going up by, $10 increments or whatever until you giggle. When you snicker, like, oh, I can't believe I just said that. That whatever it was that you snickered, go back to one below that and charge that until you can go higher than what's there. It was interesting to kind of lean in and do that sort of exercise because I think subconsciously I had a decent idea of what
Mhm.
was going on. But even then, I realized like my favorite trick for pricing was I would tell someone, hey, Carina, between you and me, I'm going to charge you this price. I'm not going to change the price, but will you be honest with me? How much is this really worth? Because I'm going to grow as a business and I'm going to do better if I can charge what this is actually worth. So give me a high and a low. Where would you have expected before we've now agreed upon a lower price for you? Where would you have expected this to go? And I found that sometimes, most of the time, I can get a decent answer out of someone if I phrase it that way. And then I just go up and up and up, figure out the price.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in terms of how you see it, as in people will pay the price of what they want to pay and what they believe. Because we have this conversation a lot, as in, well, we will charge based on the service that we offer. We don't have that set pricing because we focus on customizing our services and so forth. And so we have these conversations a lot of the time, and it is the case of you've got to show that value, and when clients see that value, they will pay what is the right price deemed for the value that you provide. Yeah, so it's an interesting one.
So let's go back to that first time. Where did you very first monetize your mental capital?
Do you know, I was having a think, and mine was I used to charge my family money for doing things. I would find random things to do and then charge and say, if I did this, like to my parents, if I clean this cupboard out or did this random thing, like you'd have your standard chores, but if I went above and beyond and did X, Y, and Z, how much would you give me? And they'd be like, oh, well, we'll give you a couple of pounds or a fiver, £5 for that. And then I started to figure out, okay, the more I would do these things. So it wasn't necessarily me monetizing a skill, but my skill was actually, I was a grafter, I was a hard worker, and I would find things that needed to be done. Then I would just get money. So I've never been somebody that goes, oh, do you know what? I can't do that because I haven't got the money. I would always find out how I could do it. To this day, I've never said, "Oh, no, I can't do that because" no, I'm like, "Okay, well, if I wanna do that, I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna do it." And you've just then gotta figure out what needs to be done in order to get the money that you need to make things happen, and that's always been sort of my way of thinking.
So my wife, to her chagrin sometimes, she's like, okay, let's look at the budget. And I was like, I don't really believe in budgets. I believe in just figuring out ways to make more money. I've since learned like budgets are important and there are some interesting, valuable things there. But my mind is the same as yours. When there was something I wanted, it was like, okay, well, I go figure out how to make some money to go do that.
Completely, completely. And then that was the sort of or there's an art of negotiation and trying to figure out how you can get that. I mean, funnily, my first job of coming out of uni was I ended up teaching English as a foreign language, which didn't work really well because I don't have any patience. And it's just, yes, patience I don't have. So I was like, right, okay, that isn't going to work for me. I then ended up getting a job in buying because my mum was like, the skills for buying completely match who you are. And that was it. I then went into buying. So I always was used to then buying things, seeing the best price I could get, negotiating. And that was almost like something that was natural for me. That's where my career started.
Interesting. So that whole negotiation. Have you read Never Split the Difference?
No, I haven't.
Oh my goodness, you have to read that book.
I'll write
So
it
I
down.
would definitely write that one down. Never Split the Difference. Fantastic book. It's by a guy who was actually a negotiator for, I believe, the US Army. And when there was a really high stakes situation, like a hostage situation, they would call him in to negotiate with the person who was holding someone hostage. So can you imagine being the guy like, this is my job. They call me and I fly out to wherever this situation's going down. And my negotiation, this is why he said, you can't split the difference, right? Like splitting the difference on like, oh, can you give me half the hostages and we don't care about the other half? Like you just don't like, no, you can't.
No.
And so he gives all sorts of interesting tips about ways that he learned to psychologically connect with these individuals who are in
Mhm.
that high stress situation and see them as human beings and also like just create a very different world in terms of the negotiating table. And it just super fascinating. I mean, from a standpoint of like how he goes about it. But yeah, never split the difference. When you were talking about negotiation, and I'm sure you come by a lot of these skills supernaturally. I mean, it was really powerful.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, I'll definitely take a look at that. And yeah, it's interesting though, because negotiation came naturally, but then when you start negotiating and you start negotiating in a corporate environment like we did at Amazon, then you start being put on all these courses, right? Which are always fun, advanced negotiation courses, and everyone approaches it different. And then you have to deal with all these kind of role plays, and then you put them into the theory into practice and everything.
So it sounds like you had some advanced training there, even.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely had some advanced training. But funnily, when you start negotiating then for a business that you don't own is very different to when you start owning your business. That's when things changed for me, as in I probably am less of a strong negotiator these days when I was than I was years ago. But then I was in my 20s, probably pretty hungry.
Well, and you think about it, I think there comes a point at which you kind of want to shift things and change some of the way that you pick things apart and where things go. So I agree with you. I think that it's all about what are you willing to lose, right? In that negotiation, what are you willing to sacrifice was the question.
Hmm.
Like, what are you
Yeah.
willing to sacrifice? What is it that is most important to you? I'm in this situation, and there are some individuals in business. I see what they've done and the prestige they've gained and the other sides of what's there. I'm like, man, that would be nice to achieve some of that. And I step back and ask that question, what are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to be on the road every other week, flying to someplace new? Are you willing to get out there and look at that? What is it that you're willing to sacrifice? So it's kind of an interesting concept to consider.
Yeah, yeah, completely.
It sounds like as you monetize that mental capital as a child, and I would disagree that it wasn't just skills or you as a grafter. Like I think you going around the house and being like, I have the knowledge to take this dirty cupboard and turn it into a clean one. And I'm going to monetize that knowledge. And it was interesting. You said, I went to my parents and said, how much would you give me? Because my kids do the same thing. How much would you give me if I X, Y, or Z? And my daughter, she's 9. They're already doing skincare products apparently at this age, and I was kind of surprised that we're like going that young with skincare products. But there was a very specific like brand and type that she wanted, and so yesterday she was literally cornering my wife. If I did the dishes extra today, and she totally negotiated, like, I'd like an extra $3 for that. And it was just interesting to see her, like, she knows how to do that, right? She knows. So I think that was monetizing a mental capital that
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because you always think about more monumental moments in your career or the obvious ones, which for me was why I ended up starting up the agency that I have now. But actually, it's kind of in your blood from an early stage of when you're doing that, and it's part of your DNA almost. And so it's interesting that you bring it back to childhood because you're right. That's probably where it all starts. And I can see it already happening with my daughter, who's like 11 and gets really excited about watching. We have the equivalent to Shark Tank, and it's Dragon's Den. And, she pauses it and says, so can you remind me what the difference between net and gross profit is? And we talk about it. And then she pauses it and goes, so what are overheads? And I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. So she's like, and then all of a sudden she gets invited to a party and they're watching Frozen. She's like, I'm not going to that, Mum. Can we just stay in and watch Dragon's Den?
Oh boy. Yeah. And the other thing I think that's fascinating as a parent is you can nurture some of this stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like and I don't think I realized how much my parents probably did in helping me like I think back to some of my early successes and even just childhood adventures in charging money or getting a paper route or all of those different things. I think it's like purely cuteness that they're selling at this point because they go to the corner and they set up the lemonade stand. And my favorite is the art sale. So they'll go to the corner and they'll put a big sign on a table and they're selling like their drawings, right? Like these are my kids like really just selling drawings or whatever else it is. And I don't know if it's just my neighborhood or full of a bunch of suckers or they've walked away with like $80. There have been moments when I've been like, maybe we should be setting up one of these every day. But I'm wondering like how much of this is just the charity of the neighborhood. I mean, and don't get me wrong, my daughter is actually super charming. Like there's some real charm there that she
Yeah.
can turn on when she wants to get something or go that direction. But it's fascinating to me to see the lemonade stands pop up in my neighborhood, and the way that my neighbors will come in, and somebody walked over and hands them a $20 bill for this drawing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys, thank you for supporting entrepreneurship.
I love that. That is awesome. And then it'll be like, right, if I can make $80 doing that,
Hmm.
what if I did it 4 times a month and then this and that? And that's when it starts, how do it's the scaling up, right? Or not that children are going to see it in that way, but it's kind of thinking how you
Well,
can do more of that.
depends on what you need, right? And that's where
Yeah.
you went, right? Time to go scale that business. As you began to scale that mental capital into growing something, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Biggest challenge for me was people. Actually, to scale up, it's no longer you and it's no longer just your skill set or your knowledge. You have to then pass that on. And that was a big challenge. It's still a big challenge because the background knowledge that I have of Amazon, of the fixing and everything, it's like a bit of a matrix. That is a rarity because that doesn't exist now. There isn't, because all the roles are so refined. So being able to have such a diverse set of array of knowledge from those days, I treasure, but I've got to just constantly be sharing with the team and helping them problem solve and troubleshoot and everything. So that was the biggest part for me, and continues to be, is how you share that knowledge.
Mm.
But also, I think the other part is knowing what you're not so great at when you think you might be good at it. And so you think, right, okay, I've got this, I'm good at this. People are paying for it, people are happy with it. But actually, could you do, if you passed it on to someone else, could they do a better job? And that's what I started to see. And that's when almost my business went up a level, was I was no longer this individual expert. Actually, I started to tap into experts in different areas that makes you like a bigger expert, I guess.
Mm.
And starting to say, I was doing marketing at the time because my role sort of expanded from doing catalog and everything into everything that you needed for Amazon. And I went from vendor to seller, like vendor seller. It's like Microsoft. Once you know one, you know the other. And it just all that grew. And then I was like thinking I was some marketeer. Then I was like, no, I'm not. So then that's when I started to hire someone for listing ops, someone that could manage marketing and everything. And then the output just grew and the level went up even more. And then it comes to a point where you then can start charging more for that, and it's all ends up just being this kind of whole cycle. But the biggest challenge, I think, is just there's an element of letting go and letting other people take certain things on. I'm quite a control person, so that wasn't easy.
There are definitely pieces of the business that are difficult to let go of, especially when you're the one who figured out how to monetize it, or you're the one who kind of came up with these strategies. There's a book, Buy Back Your Time. Have you read that one yet?
No.
Buy Back Your Time is a great one. He says basically 70% done is 100% freaking awesome because it wasn't you. You weren't the one who had to do it. And so it's important to recognize that they don't need to get to the same level as you in order for it to be 100% freaking awesome, because you can now shift and move and grow and learn to do. You've now bought back your time, is the way that he describes it. So it's a fascinating concept. What did you do to decide to let go of some of those things?
The part was I had too many clients that I couldn't manage myself, and I didn't want to say no. I could have just turned around and said, no, I can't do that anymore. I can't work with you because I've got too many clients, or I keep the clients and bring someone on. So then I would look at the areas that, to be honest, at first I had I'll be honest, less enjoyment and passion for, because if I'm passionate about something, I'm the type of person that will figure it out. I won't go, oh, I don't know how to do that. That's not my thing. I'm like, well, if everyone else is doing it, then I'm going to figure out if I can do it. I might not do it as great as everyone, but I always believe in trying everything, right? And then you can decide for yourself. And so I would take away the things that I had less passion for, and get comfortable with that. And then gradually, then I would start realizing it wasn't necessarily about passion as well. It was what I found that came easy. because that's more your skill set when it comes easy, and it doesn't take you twice or three times as long because you're trying to figure it out or pretend you're good at it or everything. Because I think also these are the years and years ago, like the examples I'm sharing, this is when Amazon agencies didn't exist, or a couple existed in the US. They didn't exist in the UK or Europe. So anyone listening is probably thinking Amazon agencies, there's so many of them. This is sort of very pre-existent. So trying to find some with these skills or trying to even break them down and refine all of them was very different in those days as well. It was pre-Amazon ads. And so, yeah, it was just trying to let go of the areas that I didn't enjoy, and then learning that the areas that I wasn't that good at. I guess there's a little bit of an ego as well at the start of where you think you can do everything, and you're convincing yourself because you're saying to clients, yeah, I can do it. I'd be asked questions and I wouldn't necessarily, yeah, I can do it. Have you done that before, Carina? No, but I can do it. Yeah. And there was a point where I found that I was saying I could do all this stuff and I was doing it all. But I was like, why are you saying you can do that? Because that's going to take you 3 times as long because you don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Super valuable lesson for anyone who's monetizing their mental capital. So as I started data automation, one of the biggest mistakes that I made was saying yes to everyone and diving in and being like, oh, I got you. I can build that. Oh, I can build a selling system, or I can automate that. I can automate anything was kind of my mentality. Like, because under the name, I mean, dataautomation.com is very broad, right? Like if it had to do with data, I'd automate it. That was my niche, so to speak. Well, I discovered pretty quickly that that's a pretty broad niche, and you probably should consider like maybe not going that crazily down that path. As I began to kind of consider what that looked like and go to that degree, I just discovered that there were things I shouldn't do. And my personality, the thing I learned I was not good at, was saying no. And my personality was such that I really, really liked the new and shiny stuff. Oh my goodness. If it was new and nobody had done it before, or nobody I knew had done it before, that was my kind of project. And so I would generally do it for less money because I liked it. And
Yeah.
not only do it for less money, but it would take me longer. And so all of these things are like, wait a minute, those are pretty bad business principles. Yeah, you're right. I was definitely not doing the right move. And so my advice to anyone who's kind of in that similar boat of like, you go figure stuff out and you enjoy those sorts of projects, is find an opposite, find someone who is willing to say no to you and have them join your team as quickly as possible and have them say no to you, right? Because you don't scale a business on new. You scale a business on new, and one of those news becomes the tried and true, and that tried and true becomes the tried and true, and that tried and true becomes the tried and true. And over time, you just scale that up into something that you've got some returns on. So I wish that I had niched down faster.
Yeah.
And because at the beginning, we would do automation for everybody. And then we started focusing most of our automation on e-commerce clients. And then we actually built our own system. And we're doing things that Zapier could do, but we were doing it for e-commerce clients in bulk. And then it was like, okay, we're the bespoke integrations company. Like if you got something that you're having a tough time getting the out of the box connectors to handle, come to us. And once we figured that out, that like that's our niche, it was like, okay, now it's a thing, and data automation's still around today. And it wasn't until we figured that out, because at the beginning we lost a fair amount of money.
Yeah, that's it. But there's the challenge, right? When I see it also as I love a challenge. And so when someone says, can you do X? And I'm like, I don't know it. I see it as a challenge, and almost a challenge outweighs how much they're paying for it.
Yeah.
But that's okay when you work for yourself and you think you've got infinite hours to work on something, and you've got the bottom line to then work. You have to completely change the way you look at things.
Okay, think back to you've got yourself when you were at Amazon, and then you've got yourself kind of doing the catalog management stuff. If you could make a phone call to her right now and tell her something that might help her monetize her mental capital more quickly, or avoid some challenges, what would you tell her?
I would tell her to hire people straight away. I spent a number of years being an individual contributor and a single person in the Amazon consulting world. And that probably slowed things down. And I think I definitely should have hired more, or hired sooner. I think it was quite scary for me at the time. I never really saw myself as an entrepreneur, a business owner. And so all of a sudden, I went through a lot of stages of, that self-doubt of not really believing who you are or what position you're in and everything. And so I would say, don't be afraid to hire people, and always hire people that you can learn from as well.
100% agree with you. And I think that another thing that I learned, and one of my biggest fears around hiring was, well, what if they quit? Or,
Hmm.
well, what if I ruin someone's life because, they came and worked for me and it all falls apart the next month? Um, and I think what I realized after the fact is the same as the whole buying principle that we talked about at the beginning. No one works for less than they think they're worth. There's a value exchange there, right? Like no one will sell
Yeah.
you their time for less than they think it's worth, at least at that time. And they may decide later that they're worth more. And I mean, there's a whole, we could have an entire podcast episode about that. But this idea of, yeah, you come work for me, the whole thing falls apart. Now you've got a lot of experience. I mean, I guess it's possible to ruin someone's life, but with good intentions, you're not going to. You're going to create a positive experience for everyone, and everyone that's worked for me has gained something from that. And that's one of the big things I take away and look at is and see like, I've changed the course of many people's careers who still to this day don't love me because I wasn't a great boss at the time, and I learned from that experience, and so did they. And we both earned some stripes and figured out where we were going. All right. So final question here. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. You're going to step into an elevator and the guy standing next to you is like, oh yeah, I'm an Amazon seller. So you
Yeah.
get 60 seconds to tell him a little bit about e-commerce nurse. And then right after that, I'm going to ask you for a tip, trick, hack, or book that you've read in the last year that you feel like has helped you upscale your mental capital. So you've got 60 seconds, ready, go.
Okay, so I have eCommerce Nurse. We're an Amazon focused agency. So we work with brands and we help them navigate the platform and grow on the Amazon platform. So that's through full account management, advertising, marketing, all the different levers available on Amazon to help grow your business is something that we cover. We also support brands that are going into TikTok Shop as well. We focus on creating content. We manage their TikTok shop, and we also work on helping them devise that brand strategy for selling on TikTok. So I say there's a team of us that are all sort of experts in that field, from creative, marketing, client management, ads, data, ops, and catalog. And yeah, in terms of why ECN, is that we are passionate about what we do. We love what we do, and we it's important that we work with the right clients as well.
Beautiful tip, trick, hack, or book that you've come across over the last year that you feel like has helped you upskill your mental capital.
The book is called Radical Candor, and what it does, and funnily, I've laminated a page here in front of me. And
Wow.
what it does is it makes sure that you give feedback to your team, and you give immediate feedback to your team. And it's all about not being afraid to have difficult conversations. It's about dealing with them, but it's how you deal with them that's important. So it's being true, it's being honest, but it's not being afraid to challenge them and telling them that something doesn't work, but doing it with care. And so my business had a bit of a ruinous empathy culture where everybody was a bit afraid to give feedback of the fear of upsetting others. But as soon as everyone learned that actually others were more upset by not knowing and they wanted the feedback, I've managed to turn the business around and create an open feedback culture now. So when people share feedback, people see it as a gift rather than take offense from it.
I love it. Radical candor. Thank you so much, Carina, for joining us. How can individuals reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, if anyone wants to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn under Carina McLeod and send me a message, or alternatively go to eCommerce Nurse. So it's ecommercenurse.com, and send us a message via contact us, and somebody in the team will get back to you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Monetizing Your Mental Capital.
And thank you so much for inviting me, Will. It's been great to speak with you again on a podcast.
Yeah, agreed. Over and out. Thanks.